Sometimes a house gets messed up during a search. That's just how it goes.
Searches don't leave damage like this, Sergeant.
Looks exactly like a search to me. You're just upset we didn't leave your junk standing.
Ever wonder what I did before this business, Sergeant?
Sergeant Kelly shrugged dismissively as Michael Winston stood in front of his ruined house.
12 years as a Marine combat engineer. I read buildings for a living. I know the difference between damage and sabotage.
That's supposed to scare me?
No. It means I know exactly what you did.
Unfortunately, your word doesn't outrank my badge. Nobody's going to believe your version over ours.
What Kelly didn't know was that every crack in those walls was about to tell a story his badge couldn't silence. Michael Winston turned onto his street and knew something was wrong before he even reached his driveway. Too many cars. Too many lights. He had been gone 2 weeks. A job out of state, checking the bones of an old office building before the owners tore it down. Michael knew buildings. He knew how they were built, and he knew how they broke. 12 years in the Marine Corps had taught him that. 2 deployments as a combat engineer had taught him more. He read structures the way other people read faces. So when he pulled into his driveway and saw his house, his stomach dropped like a dead weight. The front windows were smashed out, jagged glass hanging in the frames like broken teeth. His front door was gone, not open, gone, ripped clean off its hinges and thrown to the side of the porch. White dust drifted across his lawn, catching the afternoon sun like fog that didn't belong there. 4 police officers stood in front of his house like they were posing for a picture. Michael got out of his truck slow. His hands stayed loose at his sides. Years of training told him that whatever happened next, he needed to stay calm. Calm kept you alive. Calm kept you smart. A big man in a sergeant's uniform stepped forward, thumbs hooked in his belt like he owned the sidewalk. His name tag read Kelly. "You, Winston?" the sergeant asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "This is my house," Michael said. Kelly smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Yeah, was." Behind him, Officer Travis Allwood shifted his weight, eyes darting toward the busted windows like he didn't want to look at Michael directly. "We had a tip," Kelly said. "Drugs. Executed a no-knock warrant." He shrugged, like he was talking about the weather. "Didn't find anything." Sometimes that happens. Michael looked past him. Through the gaping hole where his front door used to be, he could see his living room gutted. Furniture flipped. Drywall torn open in long, jagged strips, like something had clawed through it. "That's not what a search looks like," Michael said quietly. "That's what a demolition looks like." Kelly's smile didn't move. "Well, mistakes happen. File it with insurance." "Mistakes?" Michael repeated. "You've been filing noise complaints." Kelly's voice dropped, took on an edge now, sharp and mean. "Against my guys, off duty, having a good time next door. You didn't like that, did you? Called the department 3 times. Made yourself a real pain in the ass." There it was. Michael felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Not surprise, recognition. "So you did this," Michael said. "Because I complained about noise." Kelly stepped closer, close enough that Michael could smell coffee on his breath. "We did this because we had a warrant. What happened inside is what happens when a house gets searched properly." He tilted his head, eyes glinting with something ugly and satisfied. "Figured a man like you would understand chain of command. Consider this a lesson. Learn who runs this street." Behind him, one of the younger officers laughed under his breath. Michael didn't yell. He didn't clench his fists. Something inside him went very still, very quiet. The same stillness he used to feel right before diffusing something that could kill him if his hands shook. He looked at Kelly for a long moment. "You're going to want a good lawyer," Michael said. The words came out flat. No anger in them. Just fact. Kelly laughed, short and sharp. "Cute. Real cute." He turned to his men. "Wrap it up. We're done here." The officers began walking toward their cruisers, boots crunching over broken glass on the front walk. Allwood glanced back once at Michael, something uneasy flickering across his face before he climbed into the passenger seat. Michael stood alone at the edge of his ruined lawn and watched the patrol cars pull away. Lights dark now, engines fading down the street like nothing had happened at all. He looked at his house. Really looked at it. The windows, the door, the dust still hanging in the air. Something about it didn't sit right in his gut. Not the anger. The anger made sense. It was something else. Something underneath the anger, cold and clinical. The part of his brain that had spent years learning how buildings failed. This didn't look like men searching for drugs. This looked like men who knew exactly where they wanted to dig. Michael stepped over the splintered doorframe and walked into what was left of his home. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the camera, and started taking pictures. Slow, careful, methodical, room by room. Not for insurance, for proof. Michael moved through his house, one room at a time, phone raised, taking pictures of everything. The living room first. His couch was flipped on its back, cushions sliced open, foam spilling out like guts. The drywall behind it wasn't just broken. It was torn open in long, straight lines, almost too straight, like someone had used a tool instead of just smashing through with a boot. Michael crouched down and studied one of the tiers close up. His stomach turned. This wasn't random. He'd seen plenty of damage in his life. Buildings hit by storms, buildings hit by neglect, buildings hit by explosions overseas. Random damage looked random. It scattered. It missed things. This didn't miss anything. Every hole in this wall lined up with a stud. Every strike lined up with something structural. Whoever tore through his walls knew exactly where the bones of the house were. Michael stood slowly and walked into the kitchen. Same thing. Cabinets pulled off their hinges, not just opened, pulled. Screws ripped clean out of the wood behind them. The drywall under his sink was gone completely, exposing pipes that had no reason to be exposed during a drug search. He snapped another picture. "You still here?" Michael turned. Sergeant Kelly stood in the busted doorway, one hand resting lazy on his belt, watching Michael with the kind of smirk a man wears when he thinks he's already won. "Taking pictures," Michael said. "For insurance?" Kelly laughed. "Good luck with that. Insurance companies love excuses to say no." Michael didn't answer. He crouched down again, photographing a torn section of baseboard near the pantry. Kelly stepped inside, boots crunching over broken tile. He looked around the wrecked kitchen like a man admiring his own work. "You know what your problem is, Winston?" Michael kept his eyes on the wall. "You think this is personal," Kelly said. "It's not. It's procedure. We had a warrant. Warrant says we search. We searched." He spread his hands, almost cheerful. "Sometimes a house gets messed up during a search. That's just how it goes." "A search doesn't look like this," Michael said quietly. Kelly's smirk twitched, just slightly. "Careful." Michael stood up and faced him directly for the first time since he'd walked back inside. He kept his voice level, steady, the same voice he used to give orders when things were falling apart around him. "You know what I did before I started my own business, Sergeant?" Kelly shrugged, uninterested. "Combat engineer. Marine Corps. 12 years. Michael let that sit a second. "I read buildings for a living. I know what a wall looks like when it fails on its own. And I know what it looks like when somebody made it fail on purpose." For just a second, barely a flicker, something shifted behind Kelly's eyes. Then it was gone, buried under that same smug confidence. "That's supposed to scare me?" Kelly asked. "No," Michael said. "It's supposed to tell you I'm not stupid." Kelly stepped closer, close enough that Michael could see the little vein pulsing at his temple. "Let me tell you something, tough guy. You can take all the pictures you want, write all the letters you want, file all the complaints you want." His voice dropped low. "Mean. Nobody's gonna care. You know why? Because it's my word against yours, and my word wears a badge. Michael didn't blink. You're going to want a good lawyer, he said again, same flat tone as before. Kelly's jaw tightened. For a moment, Michael thought the man might actually swing at him. Instead, Kelly barked out a short, ugly laugh and turned toward the door. Have a nice life in this dump, he called over his shoulder. Consider yourself lucky we didn't find nothing worth arresting you for. He whistled for his officers, still lingering out on the lawn, and they climbed into their cruisers one by one. Doors slammed. Engines started. Michael stood in his gutted kitchen and watched through the shattered window as the patrol cars pulled away down the street, taillights fading into the evening. The house went quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on a person, that makes every crack of settling wood sound loud as a gunshot. Michael looked down at his phone, scrolling slowly through the pictures he'd taken. Room after room of damage that didn't add up to a drug search. Too precise. Too deliberate. Somebody had used this raid as cover for something else. Michael didn't know what yet, but he intended to find out. He pocketed his phone, grabbed a flashlight from his damaged utility drawer, and headed toward the garage, where a pile of broken drywall sat waiting to be cleared before nightfall. The garage was worse than the rest of the house. Michael stood in the doorway, flashlight beam cutting through the dust still hanging in the air. Broken drywall covered the concrete floor in jagged white chunks. His tools, the ones he used for work, were scattered everywhere. Some smashed, some just thrown, like whoever did this wasn't looking for anything in particular. Just tearing. Except the far wall told a different story. Michael walked over slowly, boots crunching over debris. The wall near his old workbench had been hit harder than anywhere else in the house. Not smashed apart in anger. Opened. Carefully, almost surgically, like someone had known exactly where to cut. He crouched down and pulled back a loose section of drywall. Behind it sat a small metal panel, maybe 2 feet wide, bolted into the framing. The bolts were freshly stripped, scraped raw like someone had forced them open in a hurry. Michael stared at it for a long moment. He'd lived in this house 4 years. He'd rewired half the garage himself. He knew every inch of these walls. He had never seen this panel before in his life. His pulse picked up, slow and steady, the way it used to right before something dangerous. He set the flashlight down, angled it toward the opening, and pulled the panel the rest of the way off. Wiring, a lot of it. Thick black cable running down into the floor, disappearing into the concrete at an angle that made no sense for anything in his house. No outlet fed into it. No breaker in his panel box was labeled for it. It didn't connect to anything he recognized. Michael pulled out his phone and opened the city utility map app he used for work, the one that showed underground lines for gas, water, and electric across the whole city. He zoomed in on his address. Nothing. No line. No marker. No record of anything running under this exact spot. Whatever this was, it wasn't on any city document. Wasn't permitted. Wasn't inspected. It existed, buried in his own garage wall. And, as far as any official record was concerned, it didn't exist at all. Michael sat back on his heels, flashlight beam trembling slightly as his hand tightened around it. He thought about Kelly standing in his kitchen, smug and loud, talking about a drug tip that got them a warrant. He thought about the precise damage throughout the house, every strike lined up with a stud, every hole hitting something structural. A drug search didn't look like this. A drug search didn't come with a team that knew exactly where to tear into a garage wall that had no reason to be opened. Michael photographed the panel from every angle, the wiring, the concrete, the stripped bolts. He photographed the empty space on the utility map next to his address, side by side, so nobody could say later that he made this up. Something cold settled in his chest, replacing the anger he'd carried since pulling into his driveway. This wasn't about him. Not really. The noise complaints, The bad blood with Kelly's off-duty buddies next door. That was real, sure. That was the excuse. But excuses didn't explain hidden wiring with no city record. Excuses didn't explain a search team that knew exactly which wall in a stranger's garage was worth tearing open. Somebody wanted something out of this house. Something buried a long time ago, long before Michael ever bought the place. And the raid, the broken windows, the ripped-off door, the lesson Kelly bragged about teaching him, all of it had given them the perfect cover to come looking for it. Michael stood slowly, joints stiff from crouching, and looked down at the open panel one more time. The flashlight beam caught the black cable disappearing into the concrete, swallowed by the dark. "You didn't come here for drugs," Michael said quietly. To nobody, to the empty garage, to the house that had just handed him a mystery wrapped inside an injustice. "You came here for whatever's under this house." He clicked the flashlight off. Outside, the sky had gone fully dark. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Michael stood in his ruined garage a moment longer, phone full of pictures, mind already working through who he needed to call first thing in the morning. He had a sister who worked in a law office, and he had a friend who used to read buildings just like he did. Michael didn't sleep much that night. He spent most of it on the floor of his living room, back against the one wall that hadn't been torn open, going through the pictures on his phone over and over. The kitchen, the garage, the hidden panel, the empty spot on the utility map where wiring shouldn't exist but did. By morning, he had a plan. Not a whole plan, just a start. He made coffee in a kitchen that barely had counters left to set the mug on, then sat down at his one surviving chair and called his sister. Denise Winston answered on the second ring, already halfway through her morning at the law office where she worked as a paralegal. "Hey, big brother, you still out of state?" "I'm home," Michael said. "Denise, I need you to listen to something, and I need you to listen close." He told her everything. The broken windows, the ripped-off door, Kelly standing on his porch bragging about a lesson, the precise damage that lined up with every stud in his walls, the hidden panel in his garage with wiring that led nowhere on any map. Denise went quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all its morning cheer. "Michael, that's not just messed up. That's actionable. Send me everything you have. Every photo, time-stamped. Already got it." "I'm going to pull the case number today," Denise said. "If they got a warrant, there's paperwork. There's always paperwork. I want to see exactly what they told a judge to get inside your house." Michael felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly. Not relief? Not yet. But direction. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Denise said. "Just don't let them make you feel crazy. I know how this works. They'll try to make it look like nothing happened." She called back that afternoon while Michael was sweeping broken glass into a trash bag in the front hallway. He answered with glass still crunching under his boots. "Found the warrant application," Denise said, no greeting, straight to business. "Michael, this thing cites an anonymous tip. No name, no file number. No record of who called it in or when. That's unusual. Departments are supposed to document informants, even confidential ones, at least internally." "So it's fake," Michael said. "I'm not saying that yet. I'm saying it's weak. Weak enough to poke holes in if we push the right way." Denise paused. "I'll keep digging. Give me a few days." Michael thanked her again and hung up, staring down at the broken glass still scattered across his hallway floor. One thread was starting to pull loose. He needed another. That evening, sitting on his front steps, because there was nowhere clean left inside to sit, Michael called Lucian Lawson. They'd served together, years back, both combat engineers in the same unit. The kind of friendship built on trusting a man with your life more than once. Lucian had left the Corps a year before Michael and built a career as a forensic structural engineer, the kind of expert courts and insurance companies called in when a building's failure needed explaining. "Michael Winston," Lucian said when he picked up. warmth in his voice. "It's been too long, man." "I need your eyes on something," Michael said. "Not a normal job. My house got raided. Cops tore it apart looking for drugs they never found. But there's wiring hidden behind a wall in my garage that doesn't match anything on the city map. I don't know what it is. I need someone who knows how to read a building better than I do." Lucien's tone shifted instantly. "All business now. Send me pictures tonight. I'll clear my week. I'm driving out." "You sure?" "Michael," Lucien said, "you pulled me out of a collapsed building once. I can drive a few hours for you." Michael felt his throat tighten, just for a second, grateful in a way words didn't cover well. They agreed Lucien would arrive within 4 days. That night, rain started falling, light at first, then heavier, tapping against the boarded plywood Michael had nailed over his broken windows earlier that evening. He lay on a mattress in the one bedroom that still had 4 solid walls, listening to the rain, thinking about Kelly's voice on the porch, about the hidden panel, about the 2 threads now pulling at the same tangled knot. He didn't know yet how deep it went. But for the first time since pulling into his driveway, Michael felt like he wasn't just standing in the wreckage anymore. He was starting to fight back. 4 days later, Lucien Lawson's truck pulled into Michael's driveway, a heavy case of equipment riding in the bed. Michael met him on the front lawn. They didn't waste time on small talk. Lucien took one look at the boarded windows and the caved-in door frame, shook his head slowly, and said, "They really did a number on this place." "You have no idea," Michael said. "Come on." Garage. Inside, Lucien crouched in front of the open panel Michael had uncovered, running a gloved hand along the edge of the stripped bolts. He pulled a small flashlight from his jacket and leaned in close, studying the wiring, the concrete, the angle of the cable disappearing into the floor. "This isn't recent," Lucien said after a minute. "The wiring's old. Insulation's degraded. This has been here a long time." "Years. Easy. Longer than I've owned the house?" "Way longer." Lucien pulled out a small handheld scanner from his case, ran it slowly along the concrete floor, watching numbers shift on the readout. "There's something under here. Some kind of channel running below the slab. Not standard plumbing. Not standard electric." Michael felt his stomach tighten. "An easement?" "Could be." Lucien sat back on his heels. "Undocumented, if it is. I can pull county records tonight, cross-reference the parcel history. If there's an old easement tied to this address, it'll show up somewhere, even if it's buried in decades-old paperwork nobody's looked at since." They spent the rest of the afternoon in Michael's kitchen, laptops open on the one surviving section of counter, digging through public property records, old zoning filings, anything tied to the address going back as far as the county's digital archive allowed. It was Lucien who found it first. "Michael." His voice had gone flat, careful. "Look at this." Michael leaned over the screen. An old maintenance log, scanned and uploaded years ago as part of a records digitization project, listed a series of service visits to the property going back nearly 2 decades, long before Michael had ever bought the house. The visits were tied to a city program that no longer existed, something called a Community Monitoring Initiative, shut down and scrubbed from public record over 15 years ago. One name appeared on 3 separate entries in that old log. D. Kelly. Michael stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling the floor shift slightly under him even though he was standing perfectly still. "That's him," Michael said quietly. "That's the same Kelly who stood in my kitchen and told me to file an insurance claim." Lucien nodded slowly. "Early in his career, looks like. Before he made sergeant. He was assigned to maintenance work tied to this exact address, tied to a program that got shut down and buried." Michael sat down hard in the one kitchen chair still standing. It clicked into place, all at once, the way a wall finally makes sense once you know which stud is load-bearing. The raid wasn't random. Kelly hadn't stumbled onto Michael's address through some routine assignment. He had requested it. Used his rank, his years on the force, to jump this warrant ahead of whatever else the department had queued up that day. He needed inside this house, needed access to that garage wall before anyone else went looking and found what he'd left buried there years ago. The noise complaints, the bad blood over his off-duty buddies partying next door, that was real, and it made a convenient story. A story that let him walk into Michael's home with a badge and a warrant and call it a lesson, when really it was cleanup. Evidence, hidden for over a decade, about to be exposed unless Kelly got there first and tore it out himself. He wasn't punishing you for complaining, Lucian said, reading the same conclusion off Michael's face. He was protecting himself. You were just convenient. Michael looked around his gutted kitchen. The torn cabinets, the missing drywall, the wreckage Kelly had walked away from, laughing. He picked the wrong house to bury his secrets in, Michael said. Lucian closed his laptop slowly. So what do we do with this? Michael thought about Denise, about the fabricated tip with no informant record, about the warrant built on a lie. He thought about Kelly's smug face on his porch, so certain nobody would ever push back. We build a case, Michael said. A real one. Paperwork, physical evidence, all of it, lined up so tight, nobody can wave it away. Outside, evening light slanted low through the broken living room windows, catching the dust still hanging faint in the air. The fight had just gotten a lot bigger than one ruined house. Denise arrived the following week with a folder thick enough to need a rubber band around it. She met Michael and Lucian at the house, stepping carefully over a section of hallway, still waiting on new flooring, and set the folder down on the kitchen counter like it weighed more than it looked. Okay, she said. Let's put this together. Michael pulled the last chair over from the living room so all three of them could sit. Lucian opened his laptop, pulling up the scanned maintenance log with Kelly's name on it. Denise opened her folder, pulling out a copy of the warrant application, several pages marked up with yellow highlighter. Start with this, Denise said, sliding the warrant across the counter. I went back through the department's informant filing system. Confidential tips are still supposed to leave a trail internally, even if the informant's name never goes public. There's supposed to be a file number, a receiving officer, a date the tip came in. And? Michael asked. Nothing. Denise tapped the page. No file number, no receiving officer listed anywhere in the system. This tip doesn't exist outside the four corners of this warrant application. Somebody typed anonymous tip received, and a judge signed off on it without anybody checking. Lucian let out a low whistle. That's not just weak. That's fabricated. I'm not ready to say that word in front of a judge yet, Denise said carefully, but it's weak enough to build a real challenge around. Combined with what you two found, she nodded at Lucian's laptop. We've got something that looks less like a mistake and more like a pattern. Michael leaned forward, elbows on the counter. Walk me through it plain. What do we actually have? Denise held up one finger. 1. A warrant built on a tip that doesn't exist in any department record. Second finger. 2. Physical proof from a licensed forensic engineer. She nodded at Lucian. That there's an old, undocumented easement running under this property, tied to a shut-down city program. Third finger. 3. A maintenance log putting Sergeant David Kelly at this exact address, working on that exact program, years before he ever requested this warrant. She set her hand down flat on the counter. That's not a coincidence, she said. That's a man protecting something he buried, using his badge to get back inside a house he had no legal reason to search. The room went quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the street, and somewhere down the block a dog barked twice. So, what's next? Michael asked. 2 things, Denise said. First, I file a formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. On paper, that's supposed to trigger a real review. Second, she pulled another form from her folder. We request the body cam footage from the raid. By law, it has to exist. And by law, we're entitled to request it as part of a formal complaint. You think they'll hand it over easy? Lucian asked. Denise's mouth pressed into a thin line. No, I think they'll drag their feet as long as they legally can. But every day they stall is another day we're building our case instead of losing it. Michael looked down at the folder spread across his counter. The warrant, the highlighted gaps, the maintenance log with Kelly's name on it 3 separate times. 4 days ago, he'd been standing in his driveway staring at a smashed-out door, certain the worst part was already behind him. Now he understood. It had barely started. All right, Michael said. File it. Denise nodded, already gathering the papers back into her folder, squaring the edges with practiced hands. I'll head to the office this afternoon and get the complaint typed up formally. I want this filed before end of day. I'll keep working the structural side, Lucian said. I want a full written report, time-stamped, sourced, ready to hand to anyone who asks. No holes in it. Michael looked between them, 2 people who'd dropped everything the moment he called, sitting in the wreckage of his kitchen building, a case out of broken drywall and buried paperwork. Thank you, he said. Both of you. Denise squeezed his shoulder on her way to the door. Don't thank us yet. This is the easy part. She left for the office within the hour, folder tucked under her arm. Lucian stayed another hour longer, photographing the garage panel from every angle for his report before heading out himself, promising to call the moment he had a full draft ready. Alone again, Michael stood in his half-repaired kitchen and looked at the bare drywall he'd started patching himself, 1 section at a time, because he couldn't yet afford to hire it done. He picked up a trowel, mixed a fresh batch of joint compound, and got back to work. The house needed fixing. So did everything else. 2 weeks passed with no word from the department. Michael spent the time the way he'd spent every day since the raid, patching drywall by day, checking his phone by night, waiting for Denise to call with news about the internal affairs complaint or the body cam footage request. Every day that passed with silence felt heavier than the one before it. By the start of the 3rd week, he'd had enough of waiting. He drove down to the police department himself, folder of his own copies tucked under his arm, and asked to speak with someone about his insurance claim status. The lobby was cold and fluorescent lit, a bored clerk behind thick glass barely looking up when Michael gave his name. She typed for a moment, frowned at her screen, then typed again. Your claim's on hold, she said. On hold for what? She hesitated, glancing toward a hallway behind her before lowering her voice. It's flagged. Says here Chief Bolton's office put a hold on it personally. I can't tell you why. I just process what's in the system. Michael felt his jaw tighten. I've got a house with no front door and busted windows. It's been almost a month. I understand, sir. There's nothing I can do from this window. Can I speak with someone who can? The clerk made a call, and 20 minutes later a tired-looking administrator came out to speak with him in a small side office. The man introduced himself briefly, barely making eye contact, and slid a folder across the desk. Mr. Winston, I want to be straight with you, he said. Your claim is tied up because there's an active internal review involving your property. Until that review closes, the claim stays frozen. What review? Michael asked. Nobody told me there was a review happening. I filed the complaint myself. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. There's been some concern, from what I understand, about you being uncooperative with the process, declining to make yourself available for follow-up questioning, that kind of thing. Michael stared at him. Nobody has called me. Nobody has asked me a single question since the day of the raid. The administrator didn't answer that directly. He just closed the folder and said, I'd recommend patience, Mr. Winston. These things take time. Michael left the building with his fists clenched at his sides, the cold fluorescent lighting still burning behind his eyes even after he stepped out into the afternoon sun. They weren't just stalling his claim, they were building a story, quietly, carefully, about a difficult homeowner who wouldn't cooperate, laying groundwork to explain away anything that came later. He called Denise from his truck before he'd even pulled out of the parking lot. They're calling me uncooperative, he said, the second she picked up. Some review I was never told about. My claim's frozen because of it. Denise was quiet for a moment. That's not good, Michael. That's a defense they're building in case this goes public. They paint you as the problem. It undercuts everything we're trying to build. What about the body cam footage? Denise's silence stretched a beat longer this time, and Michael knew before she said it. Denied, she said finally. Came back this morning. Cited an ongoing investigation exemption. Said releasing it could compromise an active internal matter. The same investigation nobody told me about. Exactly. Denise's voice hardened, frustration bleeding through the careful, professional tone she usually kept. Michael, I've seen this play before. They stall long enough for public interest to fade, long enough for people to move on to the next headline. If we don't push back hard, this dies quiet in a filing cabinet somewhere. Michael sat in his truck a long moment, engine idling, staring out at the department building through the windshield. Somewhere inside those walls, Kelly was probably going about his shift like nothing had happened, protected by exactly the kind of bureaucratic wall Michael had just run headfirst into. So, what do we do? Michael asked. We stop asking nicely, Denise said. I'm going to start looking at who else might have standing to push on this from the outside. Someone with real power. Someone the department can't just stonewall the way they're stonewalling us. Michael drove home that evening with the folder still sitting on his passenger seat. The frozen claim, the denied footage request, the quiet accusation that he was somehow the problem here. He sat on his front porch steps once the sun went down, the same steps he'd sat on the night he called Lucian, and let the frustration settle into something colder, steadier. They wanted to bury this quiet. Michael wasn't going anywhere. The city council meeting started at 6, and Michael was in his seat by 5:30. Lucian sat beside him, a printed copy of his structural report, in a folder on his lap, ready if anyone asked for proof. Denise couldn't make it. She was buried in filings for another case. But she'd told Michael that morning to say his piece plain and simple. No legal jargon. Just the truth, in order. The meeting dragged through an hour of budget items and zoning approvals before the chair finally opened the floor for public comment. Michael stood, walked to the small podium at the front of the chamber, and looked out at the half-full room of council members and board staff. He didn't need notes. He'd lived every word of it. My name is Michael Winston, he said. A month ago, police executed a no-knock warrant on my house based on an anonymous tip that, as far as public records show, doesn't actually exist. They found no drugs. What they did find was an excuse to tear my home apart down to the studs. A few council members glanced up from their papers. Michael kept going, steady, unhurried. He described the damage, the precise strikes on load-bearing walls, the hidden panel in his garage, wiring with no record on any city utility map. He described the maintenance logs Lucian had found, tying the same officer who led the raid to that exact address years before he ever requested the warrant. By the time he finished, the room had gone noticeably quieter. I've filed a formal complaint, Michael said. My insurance claim is frozen. My request for body cam footage was denied. I was told I'm being uncooperative with a review nobody ever contacted me about. He looked directly at the council members seated in front of him. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for somebody in this city willing to ask why a police sergeant needed to destroy my home to hide something he buried there years ago. He stepped back from the podium. A short, uncomfortable silence followed before the chair thanked him and moved on to the next speaker. Michael returned to his seat, jaw tight, unsure if any of it had landed the way he needed it to. It landed with someone. After the meeting adjourned, as Michael and Lucian gathered their things to leave, a woman in a sharp blue blazer approached them in the hallway outside the chamber. Michael recognized her vaguely from the dais, one of the council members seated near the end, who'd been taking notes through most of his statement. Mr. Winston, she said, extending a hand. Penelope Summer. I'm on the council. Michael shook her hand. Councilwoman? What you just described up there, Summer said, glancing around the emptying hallway before lowering her voice. "It's not the first time I've heard something like it. I've spent the better part of a year trying to build an oversight case against Chief Bolton. Complaints about buried reviews, frozen claims, officers protected no matter what they do." Her mouth tightened. "I've never had anything solid enough to force real movement. What you just laid out, the warrant, the structural evidence, the maintenance records, that's the most concrete thing I've heard in months." Lucian and Michael exchanged a glance. "What are you saying?" Michael asked. "I'm saying I have subpoena power through the Council's Oversight Committee," Summer said. "Power your sister, as good as she clearly is, doesn't have on her own. I can compel records the department has been sitting on. Body cam footage, personnel files, assignment history." She paused. "But I need your evidence. All of it. Documented, organized, ready to hand a judge if it comes to that." Michael felt something shift in his chest, cautious hope pushing against weeks of frustration. "You'd be willing to go up against Bolton directly?" Michael asked. "I've been trying to for a year," Summer said. "I just needed a case strong enough to make it stick." She handed Michael a card. "Call my office tomorrow. Bring everything you have. If this is what I think it is, we can force this into the open a lot faster than a stalled insurance claim ever will." Michael took the card, turning it over once in his hand. "We'll be there," he said. Summer nodded once, sharp and businesslike, and disappeared back down the hallway toward the council offices. Lucian let out a low breath beside him. "Well, that's the first good news we've had in weeks." Michael looked down at the card in his hand. Summer's office number printed clean across the front. For the first time since the raid, the fight didn't feel like it was Michael standing alone against a department protecting its own. Now he had somebody with real power standing beside him. 3 days after the council meeting, Michael's phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. He'd been getting strange calls since the story of his complaint started circulating quietly through local channels. Reporters fishing for comments, a few cranks who thought he deserved what happened. He answered anyway, cautious. "Is this Michael Winston?" The voice was young, tight with nerves. Michael recognized it after a beat. "Officer Allwood?" A pause on the other end, long enough that Michael wondered if the man might hang up. "Yeah, it's me. Look, I probably shouldn't be calling you. I could get in serious trouble for this." Michael sat down slowly at his kitchen counter, giving the call his full attention. "I'm listening. I've been thinking about that day," Allwood said. "The raid. I keep thinking about it." His voice cracked slightly. "I heard about the council meeting. Somebody sent me a clip. What you said about the maintenance logs, about Kelly being tied to that address years back." He stopped, exhaled hard. "It's true. All of it." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. "Tell me what you know." "Kelly requested that warrant personally," Allwood said. "That's not normal. Usually assignments come down through rotation. Whoever's next in line catches the call. He went around that, pulled rank, jumped it ahead of 2 other pending warrants that day. I remember because my partner complained about it at roll call. Said it wasn't procedure." "Did he say why?" "No, but he knew exactly where he wanted us searching before we even got inside," Allwood said. "Went straight for the garage. Didn't check bedrooms first. Didn't check the places you'd normally check for drugs. Went straight for that back wall like he already knew something was there." Michael closed his eyes for a second, the picture snapping into full focus. Every piece Lucian and Denise had uncovered, now confirmed by someone who'd stood in that garage himself. "Will you say that to someone official?" Michael asked carefully. "Not just to me. To an investigator. On the record." The silence stretched long enough that Michael thought he'd lost him. "I've got a family," Allwood said finally, voice low. "A kid on the way. If this goes bad for me at the department, I don't know what happens to any of that." "I understand," Michael said. "I'm not going to pretend there's no risk. But right now, silence protects the man who did this. Not you. Another long pause. Then, quieter. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Who do I talk to? Michael gave him Summer's office number, the same card he'd been carrying in his wallet since the council meeting. Allwood promised to call within the day. He kept his word. 2 days later, Michael, Denise, and Lucien sat in Summer's office as her assistant walked Allwood in, visibly uneasy, hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. Summer greeted him warmly, professionally, put him at ease as best she could before sitting him down to take a formal statement. Allwood repeated everything he'd told Michael on the phone, this time on the record, his voice steadier than it had been that first call, but still carrying a nervous edge underneath. Kelly requesting the address personally, jumping the warrant ahead of others, heading straight for the garage wall like he already knew exactly what he was looking for. Summer had him sign the statement at the end, sliding the paper across the desk with careful, practiced hands. Allwood's signature came out shaky, but it came out. When he left the office a few minutes later, Michael caught his eye at the door. "Thank you," Michael said quietly. Allwood nodded once, jaw tight, and disappeared down the hallway without another word. Summer closed the folder in front of her and looked around the room at Michael, Denise, and Lucien. "This changes everything," she said. "We've got a fabricated tip with no departmental record. We've got structural evidence proving an undocumented easement tied to a shut-down city program. We've got maintenance logs placing Kelly at this exact address years before the raid." She tapped the folder holding Allwood's statement. "And now we've got a fellow officer, on the record, confirming Kelly knew exactly where to search before they ever went inside." Denise leaned forward. "That's enough for a joint complaint. Civil rights violation and evidence tampering both." "I agree," Summers said. "I'll file it formally this week, with everything you've all gathered attached in full." Michael looked around the room. His sister, his old friend, a councilwoman who'd staked her own credibility on this fight, and a nervous young officer who'd just risked his career to tell the truth. For the first time since the night he found that panel in his garage wall, it felt like the pieces were finally locking together into something too solid to knock down. He just hoped he was right. Summer filed the joint complaint on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday evening, a local reporter named nobody had heard of before, that week had already called Michael's phone twice. Michael almost didn't answer the second time. He'd spent the last month learning to be wary of unfamiliar numbers. But something made him pick up, and the voice on the other end introduced herself as a reporter with the city paper. Said she'd gotten a copy of the filed complaint through a source at the council office, and wanted to know if Michael would be willing to talk. He looked around his kitchen, still patched with mismatched drywall, still missing a working front door he'd propped shut with a 2x4 each night, and decided silence had already cost him enough. "I'll talk," he said. The story ran 2 days later. "Destroyed for nothing. Homeowner alleges police raid was cover for officer's buried secret." Michael read the headline standing in his driveway, phone in hand, before he'd even made it inside for the morning. The article laid it all out: the fabricated tip, the structural findings, the maintenance logs tying Kelly to the address years earlier, even a careful, unnamed reference to a fellow officer's corroborating statement. Summer had clearly briefed the reporter well, careful enough to protect Allwood's identity while still making the case impossible to ignore. By noon, other outlets had picked it up. By evening, it was leading the local news broadcast, a photo of Michael's boarded windows filling half the screen, while an anchor read through the allegations in a grave, careful voice. The department moved fast. A spokesperson issued a brief statement within hours, confirming that Sergeant David Kelly had been placed on paid administrative leave pending a full internal review of the allegations. Chief Bolton followed the next morning with his own statement, promising the department took the claims extremely seriously. and vowing full accountability once the facts were established. Michael read both statements standing in his kitchen, Denise on speakerphone beside him. "Paid leave," Michael said. "Not suspended. Paid." "It's a start," Denise said, though her voice carried a note of caution underneath the encouragement. "It means they can't just ignore it now. There's too many eyes watching." Lucian showed up that afternoon with a box of takeout and his laptop, insisting they eat something other than coffee for once. The three of them sat together in Michael's half-repaired living room, plates balanced on their knees, watching the story continue to spread across every local channel Michael flipped through. "Look at that," Lucian said, nodding at the screen as a photo of the department's front entrance flashed by. Reporters gathered outside waiting for a comment nobody was giving. "A month ago, you were standing alone in a wrecked house. Now the whole city's watching them squirm." Michael allowed himself a small, tired smile, the first genuine one he could remember in weeks. It didn't erase the exhaustion sitting deep in his shoulders, the months of frozen claims and denied footage requests, and being quietly labeled uncooperative by people who'd never once called to ask him a single question. But it felt, for the first time, like the story was finally slipping out of the department's control and into the open, where it couldn't be buried in a filing cabinet. Denise raised her water glass, half joking, half not. "To momentum." They clinked glasses, Lucian's soda can against Michael's water bottle against Denise's cup. And for a few hours, sitting together in a living room still missing half its baseboards, it felt almost like victory. Michael's phone buzzed against the coffee table just after 8. He glanced at the screen, expecting another reporter, another stranger fishing for a quote. It was Summer's office. The message was short, businesslike, giving nothing away. "Need you to call first thing tomorrow morning. Important development." Michael stared at the screen a moment, the warm, easy feeling of the evening cooling slightly in his chest. Denise noticed his expression shift and leaned over to read the message herself. "Could be good news," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she believed it. "Could just be logistics. Next steps on the hearing." "Could be," Michael said. But something in his gut, the same instinct that had told him the damage in his house wasn't random, told him not to get comfortable. He set his phone face down on the coffee table and tried to enjoy what was left of the evening with Denise and Lucian, the takeout going cold between them, the television still murmuring softly in the background. He didn't sleep well that night. Morning came too fast, gray light creeping through the plywood-covered windows, and Michael was already awake, phone in hand, dialing Summer's office before the coffee had even finished brewing. Summer picked up on the first ring, which told Michael everything before she even said a word. "Michael!" Her voice was tight, clipped in a way it hadn't been before. "I wanted you to hear this from me before you saw it anywhere else." Michael set his coffee mug down slowly. "Tell me." "Bolton moved overnight," Summer said. "The Internal Review Board reclassified the complaint. It's no longer being handled as a criminal evidence tampering matter. They've pushed it down to a civil personnel review." Michael gripped the edge of the counter. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means it strips away most of the teeth," Summer said. "Civil review means no criminal referral pending investigation outcome. It means Kelly's leave stays paid, and it can drag on for months with no real consequence attached. It means Bolton's office gets to control the pace and the outcome, instead of an outside prosecutor." Michael closed his eyes. He buried it. "He tried to," Summer said. "I'm fighting the reclassification through the council, but that takes time we don't really have. Public attention doesn't stay this high forever, and he knows that better than anyone." Michael thanked her, hung up, and stood in his kitchen a long moment, the gray morning light doing nothing to soften the news settling heavy in his chest. It got worse that afternoon. His phone rang again a little after 2, and this time it was Allwood's number. "Michael." The young officer's voice was different now, none of the careful resolve from Summer's office 2 weeks earlier. It shook, thin and scared. I need to tell you something. What happened? I got called into a meeting yesterday, Allwood said. Bolton's office. 2 supervisors I've never worked with directly. Just sitting there, going through my file line by line, my performance reviews. A complaint from 3 years ago I'd forgotten even existed. His breathing came ragged over the line. They didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. My career's over here if I don't walk back my statement. Michael's stomach dropped. Travis, don't... I've got a kid coming, Michael. Allwood's voice cracked fully now. I can't lose this job. I'm sorry. I already told Summer's office this morning. I'm recanting. Michael sat down hard in his kitchen chair, phone pressed to his ear, saying nothing for a long moment because there was nothing fair to say. He understood fear. He'd seen good men make impossible choices under pressure before, in places far more dangerous than a police department's back office. He couldn't hate Allwood for choosing his family, but the ground under their case had just cracked wide open. I understand, Michael finally said, quiet. No anger in it, just exhaustion. Thank you for calling me yourself. Allwood hung up without saying much else. Michael called Denise and Lucien that evening, and the 3 of them sat together once more in his half-repaired living room, the mood entirely different from the celebration just days before. Denise laid it out plainly, the way she always did. Without Allwood's testimony on record, we're down to physical and documentary evidence only, she said. It's still strong, but it's not the same as a fellow officer confirming Kelly knew exactly where to search before they went inside. The reclassification strips the criminal weight, Summer had told him earlier, and Michael repeated it now for Lucien's benefit. Bolton's buying time. Public attention's already starting to fade. I saw it on the news tonight. Barely a mention. Buried behind the weather. Lucien rubbed a hand over his face. So, where does that leave us? Nobody answered right away. Michael stood and walked to the front of the house, stepping past the 2x4 still propped against his doorframe each night in place of a working lock. He stepped outside onto the porch, the same spot Kelly had stood months earlier, smug and certain nothing would ever touch him. The house behind him was still boarded, still half-repaired, a physical wound that refused to fully close, no matter how many weekends Michael spent patching drywall alone. He looked down at the folder in his hands. Lucien's structural report, Allwood's original statement, now worthless as testimony, the maintenance logs that didn't lie, no matter how scared a man got. They buried the man who could talk, Michael said quietly. To nobody, to the dark street, to the house that had started all of this. They didn't bury the walls that can't lie. Behind him, the porch light flickered once against the gathering dusk. Michael stood there a long moment longer, letting the anger settle into something colder, something more useful. They thought silencing one witness ended this. They were wrong. The next morning, Michael drove to Lucien's office, folder in hand, Denise meeting them there straight from a deposition across town. Lucien's office sat above a small engineering firm downtown, cluttered with blueprints and half-finished models on every surface. He cleared a space on his conference table as Michael and Denise settled into chairs, laying out everything they had in front of them like pieces of a puzzle that had lost one crucial edge. Allwood's gone, Denise said, getting straight to it. We plan around that now. No testimony we can't fully control. Then we build something nobody can scare into silence, Michael said. Something that doesn't have a family to protect, or a job to lose. Lucien nodded slowly, already pulling up files on his laptop. The report. I've been refining it since the day we found that panel. Let me show you where it stands. He turned the screen toward them. Page after page of documented findings. Photographs of the concealed panel, the stripped bolts, the wiring degradation analysis proving the installation predated Michael's ownership by well over a decade. Scanned county records showing the shuttered community monitoring initiative the wiring had once served. And beneath it all, cross-referenced and highlighted, the maintenance logs listing D. Kelly at that address 3 separate times, years before he ever requested the warrant that tore Michael's house apart. This report stands on its own, Lucian said. No testimony required, just physical fact, documented and time-stamped, the kind that holds up regardless of who gets scared off. Denise leaned forward, scanning the pages. It's strong, but we need one more piece to close the loop completely. Right now, we've got Kelly's name tied to the property years ago. We need something that proves he specifically requested this warrant recently on this exact address. Not just coincidence, but intent. Assignment records, Michael said. Exactly, Denise said. Departments log warrant assignments internally. Who requested what, when, and why it got approved. If Kelly pulled rank to jump this warrant ahead of others, like Allwood told us before he recanted, there should be a record of that request somewhere in the system. Would the department hand that over willingly? Lucian asked, though his tone made clear he already suspected the answer. No chance, Denise said. Not after burying the criminal referral already. But Summers' subpoena power isn't dead just because the internal review got reclassified. She can still compel records through the council's oversight committee, separate from whatever Bolton's office wants to control. Michael pulled out his phone. I'll call her now. Summer answered quickly, listened to the plan without interrupting, and agreed without hesitation. I can file for the assignment records today, she said. It'll take a few days to compel compliance, but they legally have to produce them once the subpoena's issued. Bolton can slow walk a lot of things. He can't ignore a legal order from the Oversight Committee, not without making things dramatically worse for himself. 3 days later, the records arrived. A formal request log, dated weeks before the raid, showing Kelly had personally submitted a priority override, jumping Michael's warrant ahead of 2 other pending cases scheduled that same day. The justification field, required by department policy, listed only a single vague line. Urgent community safety concern. No specifics. No supporting detail. Nothing that explained why Michael's address, out of everything on the docket that day, suddenly needed to jump the line. Michael stared at the document a long moment, feeling the last piece lock into place. There it is, he said quietly. He didn't stumble onto my house. He went looking for it. Denise laid the 4 pieces of evidence side by side across Lucian's conference table. The fabricated tip with no informant record. Lucian's structural report proving the wiring predated Michael's ownership. The maintenance logs tying Kelly to the address years earlier, and now the priority override request with its hollow, unsupported justification. This chain doesn't need anyone to testify, Denise said, looking between Michael and Lucian. It doesn't need a nervous witness who can be pressured into silence. Every piece of this stands on its own, documented, time-stamped, sourced. Nobody can scare paper into recanting. Michael looked at the evidence spread across the table. 4 separate threads pulled from wreckage and buried records, now woven into something whole. We need a public hearing, Michael said, not another quiet internal review Bolton can bury in a filing cabinet. Something on record, in front of people, where he can't just reclassify it away overnight. Denise nodded slowly. Summer can convene an emergency oversight session. She's been wanting exactly this kind of case for over a year. Michael already had his phone in hand, Summer's number pulled up, thumb hovering over the call button. Then, let's give her one, he said. The council chamber filled up fast that morning, faster than Michael had ever seen it during the meeting where he'd first spoken weeks earlier. Summer had called the emergency oversight session for 9 o'clock, and by 8:45 every seat was taken, reporters lining the back wall with cameras already rolling. Word had gotten out. The department knew this wasn't a routine hearing. Michael sat at a table near the front, Denise on one side, Lucian on the other, a folder in front of each of them holding copies of everything they'd built. Across the aisle, Chief Bolton sat rigid in a dark suit, flanked by 2 department lawyers who kept leaning in to whisper things he wasn't reacting to. Summer opened the session with a brief statement, laying out the purpose, plainly for the record, and the cameras, to examine formal allegations of a fabricated warrant, evidence tampering, and misconduct connected to Sergeant David Kelly, and the department's handling of the complaint since it was filed. Then she called Michael forward. He walked to the podium, folder in hand, and didn't rush. He'd learned by now that rushing gave people room to interrupt, to talk over him, to make him sound less certain than he was. On the night my house was raided, Michael said, officers struck load-bearing points throughout my home with a precision no ordinary search would require. He held up a printed photo, the torn drywall lined up exact against the studs behind it. This is what my walls looked like the next morning. This is not what a drug search looks like. This is what it looks like when somebody knows exactly where to dig. He stepped back, and Lucien took the podium next. Lucien laid out his structural findings methodically, walking the room through the hidden panel, the wiring degradation proving decades of age, the undocumented easement tied to a city program shut down and scrubbed from public record. He held up the scanned maintenance log, Kelly's name circled in red on 3 separate entries. This wiring predates Mr. Winston's ownership by well over a decade, Lucien said. Whatever this raid was searching for, it wasn't drugs. It was something buried in that wall long before he ever bought the house. Denise followed, laying out the fabricated tip with no informant record anywhere in the department's system. Then the priority override request Kelly had filed weeks before the raid, jumping the warrant ahead of 2 other pending cases, with nothing but a hollow, unsupported justification attached. 4 separate pieces of evidence, Denise said, addressing the room directly now. A warrant built on a tip that doesn't exist. Physical proof the destroyed wall concealed something from Sergeant Kelly's own past. Records placing him at that address years before this raid. And a priority request he personally filed to jump ahead of the line, with no real justification given. She let the silence hang a moment. This wasn't a lesson about noise complaints. This was a man erasing his own history, using a badge to do it. Summer turned to Bolton. "Chief, would you care to respond?" Bolton stood slowly, buttoning his jacket, and began with practiced calm about department procedure, about the presumption of good faith in officer conduct, about premature conclusions drawn from incomplete information. Summer cut through it. "Chief, can you explain why Officer Allwood, the original corroborating witness in this case, was called into a review of his personnel file within days of giving a formal statement?" Bolton's jaw tightened. "That review was unrelated. Can you explain," Summer pressed, "why the subpoenaed assignment records show no internal justification for Sergeant Kelly's priority override beyond a single vague phrase? I'd have to look into the specifics." "You approved his placement on paid leave personally," Summer said. "You reclassified this complaint from a criminal matter to a civil one overnight, the same week public attention peaked. Can you explain that timing, Chief?" Bolton opened his mouth, closed it, glanced toward his lawyers, who offered nothing back. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable, cameras capturing every second of it. "I don't have those specifics in front of me today," Bolton finally said, voice thinner than it had been minutes earlier. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. A reporter near the back was already typing fast on her phone. Summer closed her folder with a firm, deliberate motion. "Then let the record show the department's chief could not account for the timing of these actions when directly asked, under oath, in a public hearing." She turned to the rest of the committee. "I move to formally suspend Chief Bolton pending a full independent investigation into the handling of this complaint," Summer said. "And I move to refer Sergeant David Kelly for criminal investigation on charges of evidence tampering and filing a false warrant affidavit." The room erupted into murmurs, cameras clicking, reporters already halfway out of their seats. Michael sat still at the front table, watching Bolton's face go pale, watching the walls he and Lucien and Denise had built finally do what paper alone couldn't do: hold. The hearing broke just after noon, the council chamber emptying into a hallway crowded with reporters and cameras. Michael stepped out beside Denise and Lucien, still absorbing what had just happened inside. Summer's motion, Bolton's pale, cornered silence, the room full of murmurs as the committee voted to move both referrals forward on the spot. It had happened faster than Michael expected, faster than months of frozen claims and denied footage requests had prepared him for. He didn't get long to process it. A commotion rippled through the hallway near the far exit, voices rising sharp over the general noise of the crowd. Michael turned in time to see two plainclothes investigators approaching Sergeant David Kelly, who'd apparently been waiting outside the chamber for news of the hearing's outcome, expecting, Michael guessed, a different result entirely. One investigator said something low, official. Kelly's face shifted from confusion to disbelief to something harder, angrier, as the second investigator stepped behind him and asked him to place his hands behind his back. "This is insane," Kelly said, loud enough to carry down the hallway. "You're doing this here? Now? Sergeant Kelly, you're being placed under arrest on charges of evidence tampering and filing a false warrant affidavit," the investigator said, voice flat and procedural, the words carrying easily over the sudden hush that fell across the crowded hallway. "You have the right to remain silent." Cameras swung toward him instantly, reporters surging forward, phones raised. Kelly's eyes scanned the hallway, wild for a moment, until they landed on Michael standing near the chamber doors. "You did this," Kelly said, voice cracking with something between fury and disbelief. "You think this changes anything? You think—" "Sir, please don't resist," the investigator said, cutting him off, tightening the handcuffs with practiced efficiency. Michael didn't answer him. He didn't need to. Months earlier, this same man had stood on Michael's porch, smug and untouchable, telling him to file an insurance claim and move on, certain nobody's word would ever outweigh his badge. Now, Michael stood in a courthouse hallway and watched that same man led away in handcuffs, past the same community members who'd shown up that morning hoping to see exactly this. Michael stayed silent. He let the moment speak for itself. The investigators walked Kelly past him, close enough that Michael caught the man's eyes one final time. No smirk left in them now. Nothing but raw, cornered anger. Michael held his gaze steady until Kelly looked away first. The hallway doors swung shut behind them, muffling the last of Kelly's protests as he was led toward a waiting car outside. Denise exhaled slowly beside Michael, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "It's really happening." "It's happening," Lucien agreed, quiet, still watching the doors. Within 3 days, the story shifted from local news to statewide coverage. Chief Bolton, facing mounting pressure and an independent investigation now confirmed by the State Attorney General's office, announced his resignation in a brief, carefully worded statement that mentioned nothing about the specific findings, only a desire to allow the department to move forward under new leadership. Nobody believed the statement, and nobody much cared. The resignation itself was the headline. Summer called Michael personally the following week, her voice carrying the kind of tired satisfaction that came from finally winning a fight she'd been fighting alone for over a year. "The city council approved emergency funding this morning," she told him. "Full reconstruction of your home, covered entirely by the city, given the circumstances. No more fighting your insurance company over it." Michael sat with the phone pressed to his ear, something in his chest loosening for the first time in months. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." "There's one more thing," Summer said. "The council's setting up a new independent auditor position. Someone to review police search warrant compliance going forward. Make sure something like this doesn't happen to anyone else in this city. Structural background required. I can't think of anyone better qualified than the man who cracked this case open with nothing but a flashlight and a good eye for construction." Michael sat quietly a moment, turning the offer over in his mind. "I'd like that," he said finally. "Good," Summer said. Come by my office Thursday. We'll get you set up. Michael stood on his front lawn that evening, phone still warm in his hand, looking at his house, still boarded, still waiting on repairs that would finally, truly begin. The wreckage wasn't gone yet, but for the first time since the night he pulled into this driveway and found his door torn off its hinges, Michael believed it would be. 6 weeks later, the last of the construction crew packed up their trucks and pulled away from Michael's driveway for good. He stood on the front lawn and looked at his house the way he used to look at buildings for work, checking lines, checking corners, checking for anything out of place. New windows caught the afternoon light clean and unbroken. Fresh siding-covered walls that had once been torn open down to the studs. A new front door, solid oak, stood exactly where the old one had been ripped off its hinges months earlier. The city had covered every dollar, just as Summer promised. No more fighting an insurance company that had spent weeks trying to call him uncooperative. No more 2x4s propped against a broken frame each night, praying the house would hold until morning. Michael walked up the front path slowly, running a hand along the new railing, and stepped inside. The living room smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. He walked through it room by room, the same rooms he'd photographed that first night, with shaking hands and a cold, sick feeling in his chest, documenting damage he hadn't yet understood the size of. The kitchen counters were new, level, whole. The garage held no hidden panel anymore. Lucien had made sure the old wiring was properly removed and documented as part of the final structural report, closing out the last physical trace of whatever Kelly had spent years trying to keep buried. Michael stood in the garage a long moment, looking at the smooth, unbroken wall where the panel used to be. It was over. Really over. Kelly sat in a county jail cell awaiting trial on charges that could put him away for years. Bolton's resignation had triggered a wider state investigation into the department's culture of cover-ups, one that was still uncovering new problems each week, according to Denise, who'd been following the case closely from her office. The department itself was under new leadership now, a reform-minded chief brought in from outside the city, promising changes Michael intended to watch closely. He heard the front door open behind him. "You in here?" Denise's voice carried through the house, followed by footsteps. Michael met her and Lucien in the front hallway, both of them looking around at the finished repairs with something like quiet awe. "It looks good, man," Lucien said, running a hand along the new drywall. "Really good." "Better than good," Denise said. "It looks like nothing ever happened here." Michael shook his head slowly. "Something happened here," he said. "I don't think I'll ever forget standing in this hallway with a phone camera, trying to prove what I already knew in my gut." He looked around at the fresh paint, the new fixtures. "But maybe that's all right. The house doesn't have to carry it anymore. I do." They stood together for a moment in comfortable silence, the three of them who'd spent months building a case out of wreckage and buried paperwork, out of a stranger's fabricated tip, and one nervous officer's shaking signature. "You start the new job Monday," Denise said, more statement than question. "Monday," Michael confirmed. "Independent auditor, reviewing search warrant compliance across every department in the city, making sure nobody else woke up to find their home destroyed and called a lesson." It felt strange, putting the same eye that once read collapsing buildings toward protecting people from men like Kelly. But it felt right, too. Necessary. Lucien clapped him on the shoulder. "You earned it." They said their goodbyes not long after, Denise heading back to the office, Lucien promising to call about a fishing trip he'd been threatening to plan for years. Michael walked them both out to their cars, waved as they pulled away down the quiet street, and turned back toward his house standing whole and solid in the fading afternoon light. He walked back up the front path slowly, taking his time, the way he hadn't been able to for months. At the doorway, he paused. This was the exact spot Kelly had stood, months ago, thumbs hooked in his belt, smirking like nothing could ever touch him. Michael could still hear the man's voice if he let himself, still see that ugly, satisfied grin. It didn't sting the way it used to. Michael stepped inside his rebuilt home, past the threshold Kelly once claimed like it belonged to him. He turned, gripped the new door, solid and heavy under his hand, and closed it behind him, quiet, steady, final. His house, his door, his own terms, at last. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.